Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Today we're going to be talking about something pretty heavy. Um, we're going to be talking about 9/11 conspiracy theories.
It's a big one.
Yeah, it is. And, right off the bat, we're not here to endorse or debunk anything. We just want to kind of understand why these theories exist, what makes them compelling to some people.
Right, we want to see what they tell us about how people process tragedy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a good place to start is you know, 9/11 happens, it's this huge event.
A turning point.
And then all these alternative narratives start popping up. That say something other than Al-Qaeda acting alone was responsible.
Right, and these narratives say a lot of different things. Some talk about government cover-ups, inside jobs, even foreign powers being involved.
Yeah, it can get pretty wild. But I
Yeah.
think before we get into all that, it might be good to just lay out the main categories of these theories.
Right, so we can broadly group them into two buckets, LIHOP and MEHOP.
Okay, LIHOP, MEHOP.
Yeah, so LIHOP stands for Let It Happen on Purpose.
Okay, so that's like someone in power knew the attacks were going to happen, but they didn't do anything to stop it.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean they planned it,
Yeah.
but they knew and let it happen.
Okay, so that's LIHOP, and what about MEHOP?
MIHOP stands for Make It Happen on Purpose.
Okay, so that's like a whole other level.
Right? It's the idea that some part of the government actually orchestrated the whole thing.
Wow, so that's saying the government planned and carried out 9/11.
And potentially even framed Al-Qaeda.
That's a huge claim.
It is, and obviously a controversial one.
It seems like both LIHOP and MEHOP are based on this distrust of the government. Right?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of these theories stem from that distrust.
Yeah, but it's not just about distrust.
Yeah.
There are other things that come up a lot.
Right, things like the idea of foreknowledge.
Foreknowledge, yeah, like the idea that someone knew the attacks were going to happen.
Exactly. And one of the most debated aspects of that is the response or lack of response from NORAD.
NORAD being the North American Aerospace Defense Command.
Right. They're responsible for aerospace warning and control.
So people question why they didn't scramble jets and intercept the planes.
That's the air defense stand-down theory,
So some people say that NORAD deliberately stood down.
which implies they knew about the attacks beforehand.
But the official investigations say that it was a bunch of miscommunications and procedural failures.
And while there's no evidence to support a deliberate stand-down, the fact that it took so long to respond fuels those suspicions.
Right. I can see how that would make people wonder, especially when you add in things like the unusual trading activity before the attacks.
You're talking about the put options on United and American Airlines stocks?
Yeah, all those put options that were bought right before 9/11
It does make you wonder if someone knew what was about to happen.
and made a profit off of it.
The 9/11 Commission concluded that it was probably just a coincidence.
But yeah, the timing is definitely suspicious.
It's one of those things that, even with a plausible explanation, still raises questions.
And those unanswered questions create room for these theories to grow.
Exactly. Ambiguity is fertile ground for speculation.
And speaking of speculation, let's talk about the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, because that's a big one for conspiracy theorists.
Right. The controlled demolition theory.
Yeah, the idea that the towers didn't collapse because of the plane impacts, but because they were rigged with explosives,
And that someone intentionally brought them down.
which is a pretty wild idea when you think about it.
It is, but there are people, including some physicists and engineers,
Yeah.
who argue that the way the towers collapsed, the speed, the symmetry, it all points to a controlled demolition.
I can see where they're coming from.
Sure.
The images of the towers collapsing are pretty striking.
They are, and those images definitely play a role in the theory's popularity, but the scientific consensus very strongly disagrees with the controlled demolition theory.
So the official explanation is that the towers collapsed because of the damage from the planes.
Combined with the heat from the fires, which weakened the steel structures.
So it was a perfect storm of factors that led to the collapse.
Precisely. And from a scientific standpoint, it makes a lot more sense than the idea of a controlled demolition.
Plus the logistics of planting all those explosives without anyone noticing.
It would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
Right. So while the visual might suggest a demolition, the science really doesn't support it.
Yeah, and it's always important to look at all the evidence, not just the parts that fit a particular narrative.
Okay, so we've talked about the towers,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of theories about the Pentagon attack, too.
Right, but there's the theory that Flight 77 didn't actually hit the Pentagon.
That it was something else, maybe a missile or a smaller plane.
And their evidence for that is
Well, they point to the size of the impact hole.
saying it's too small for a Boeing 757.
But what about all the eyewitness accounts and the debris they found at the site? Not to mention the passenger remains.
They have explanations for that, too.
Yeah.
But the missile theory has been thoroughly debunked by experts.
Yeah, the evidence is pretty clear that it was Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon.
Right, the debris, the black boxes, eyewitness accounts, it all points to a plane hitting the Pentagon.
And not just any plane, but Flight 77.
But these theories have a way of persisting even when the evidence contradicts them.
Right, it's like people become so invested in these alternative narratives
Mm-hmm.
that they're willing to overlook or even dismiss evidence that doesn't fit.
It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon, really.
Yeah, and we see the same thing with the theories about Flight 93, the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania.
Right, some people believe it was shot down, maybe because the passengers were getting too close to uncovering some kind of truth,
But experts say the plane probably broke apart midair,
which would explain the scattered debris field,
and it's more likely to have happened during the struggle between the hijackers and the passengers.
which makes it even more tragic.
Yeah. But even with that explanation, some people still cling to the shot-down theory.
It goes to show how powerful these alternative narratives can be, even when they go against the evidence.
Okay, so we've got the towers, the Pentagon Flight 93, and there's another layer to all of this, the hijackers themselves.
Right, some theories question their identities or suggest they were just pawns in a bigger game.
Like patsies who were manipulated or maybe even didn't exist at all.
And they point to things like inconsistencies in their backgrounds or flight training.
And wasn't there some confusion about some of them being alive after the attacks?
Yeah, but that turned out to be mistaken identity, just a lot of chaos and misinformation in those first few days.
So the FBI was able to confirm the identities of all 19 hijackers.
And their links to Al-Qaeda.
But for some people, those early mistakes or inconsistencies, they're seen as proof of a cover-up.
Which feeds into the narrative that there's a hidden truth.
Right, they're not just questioning the events, they're questioning the whole system of information.
Exactly. They see a grand conspiracy where every official statement, every piece of evidence is part of a bigger lie.
Which is a pretty unsettling way to look at the world.
It is, but it speaks to a deep mistrust of authority,
And a need to find meaning in the face of tragedy.
which is something we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
So we've talked about what these theories say happened, but what about why? What are the supposed motives behind all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, why would anyone want to do this?
Well, it really depends on the theory, but some common themes are things like U.S. global dominance, justification for war, even this idea of a new world order.
Okay, so let's start with U.S. global dominance. What does that mean exactly?
Well, some people believe that 9/11 was staged to justify the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
So it was like an excuse to invade those countries.
Exactly, and they often point to groups like the Project for a New American Century. It was a think tank that advocated for a strong U.S. military presence in the Middle East.
Okay, so they're saying this group wanted the U.S. to be the dominant power in the region.
Right, and that they saw 9/11 as a way to achieve that goal.
So the attacks were like a pretext for war.
Exactly, a
Yeah.
way to rally public support for something they already wanted to do.
Which is a pretty cynical view.
It is, but it resonates with people who believe that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were motivated by things like oil or geopolitics.
Right, it's like they're saying the government have ulterior motives.
Exactly, and those motives were more important than the lives lost on 9/11.
Okay, so that's the global dominance motive. What about the New World Order?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. It's this idea that there's a secretive group of elites who want to create a one-world government.
So like a global totalitarian state.
Exactly, and in this theory, 9/11 was just one step in their plan.
A step towards dismantling national sovereignty and individual freedom,
Right, and it plays into those fears of losing control.
of being ruled by this shadowy, unelected power.
Exactly, and it's a powerful narrative because it taps into very real anxieties about the concentration of power.
And the erosion of individual liberty.
Right, it's a fear that's especially potent in times of crisis.
Like after a major event like 9/11.
When people are looking for answers and trying to make sense of a world that suddenly feels very uncertain,
Okay, so we've got these grand motives. But who are the people actually pushing these theories? Is there like a central organization behind the 9/11 truth movement?
well, the 9/11 truth movement isn't really a single entity. It's more of an umbrella term for a lot of different people and groups.
So it's not like a hierarchical organization with a leader and a clear agenda.
Right, it's more of a loose network of individuals with different backgrounds, motivations, and beliefs.
So you've got academics, researchers, journalists, even just regular people who are skeptical of the official narrative.
Exactly, and their reasons for being involved vary too. Some are driven by a desire for truth and justice. Others are attracted to the mystery and intrigue of these alternative narratives.
I can see how that would be appealing.
Yeah.
It's like you're part of a select group that's privy to some secret knowledge,
Right. It creates a sense of community and shared purpose.
especially in a world that can feel increasingly chaotic and unpredictable.
Exactly. And for some people, those feelings of belonging and understanding, they're more important than adhering to the official narrative.
So it's not just about the facts.
It's about how those facts are interpreted and the meaning people derive from them.
Okay, so we've got this network of people, arranged motives, and all these theories swirling around. But how has the media reacted to all of this?
It's been a mixed bag, really. Some outlets have engaged with these theories, trying to debunk them or at least critically examine the claims.
Like Popular Mechanics, they published a bunch of articles debunking the most common 9/11 myths.
Right, and there are other publications like Time magazine or The Guardian that have explored the phenomenon of 9/11 conspiracy theories, trying to understand why they persist and what they say about our society.
But there's also been a lot of dismissal, right? Like mainstream media outlets just labeling them as crazy or fringe theories.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some outlets have been very quick to dismiss these theories without really engaging with them.
Which I guess makes sense to some extent. Some of these theories are pretty out there.
They are, but I think that dismissive attitude can actually backfire. Well, it feeds into the us versus them mentality that a lot of conspiracy theorists have.
So by dismissing their beliefs, you're confirming their suspicions that the media is part of the cover-up.
Exactly. It makes them even less likely to trust mainstream sources of information.
And more likely to retreat into those echo chambers where their beliefs are reinforced.
Right. So it's a tricky balance. You want to be critical of these theories, but you also don't want to alienate the people who believe them.
Yeah, it's like, how do you address these theories in a way that's both respectful and critical?
It's a good question, and there's no easy answer. But I think it starts with focusing on the evidence and the potential harm that these theories can cause.
Right, because even if these theories are wrong, they can still have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely, they can erode trust in institutions, fuel division, and even lead to violence.
Okay, so we've talked about the motives, the people involved, and the media's response. But what about the criticisms of these theories? What are the main arguments against them?
Well, critics often point out that these theories rely on selective evidence. They cherry-pick data to support their claims while ignoring anything that contradicts them.
So it's like they're building a case, but only using the evidence that fits their narrative.
Exactly, and they often misrepresent or distort scientific findings to fit their worldview.
Like the molten steel debate. They claim that the presence of molten steel proves that explosives were used. But scientists say that the heat from the jet fuel fires was enough to melt steel.
Right, and there's no evidence that any explosives were ever found at the World Trade Center site.
It seems like they're grasping at straws, looking for any scrap of evidence to support their beliefs.
And their logic is often flawed. They make leaps in reasoning and assumptions that aren't supported by the evidence.
Like the claim that no plane hit the Pentagon,
Yeah.
even though there's clear evidence to the contrary.
Right, they dismiss all the eyewitness accounts, the debris, the black boxes, because it doesn't fit their predetermined conclusion.
So it's like they've already made up their minds. And they're just looking for evidence to confirm what they already believe.
Exactly, and that confirmation bias makes it very difficult to have a productive conversation.
Because they're not open to considering alternative perspectives.
Right, and that's one of those dangerous aspects of these theories.
Because they can create these echo chambers where people are only exposed to information that reinforces their existing beliefs.
And that can lead to a very distorted view of reality.
Yeah, and it can make it really hard to address real problems. Because you're not even starting from a shared understanding of the facts.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to be critical of these theories and to promote media literacy and critical thinking skills.
So that people can evaluate information for themselves and make informed decisions.
Right, because in the end, it's about getting to the truth. And that requires being open to different perspectives, even if they challenge our beliefs.
Okay, so we've talked about the motives, the people involved, the media's response, and the criticisms. But there's one more thing I want to touch on. The psychological and social factors that make people susceptible to these theories in the first place.
That's a great point. We've focused a lot on the what of these theories, but the why is just as important.
Yeah, like why do these narratives resonate with some people, even when the evidence doesn't support them?
It's a complex question and one that we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned, folks, because we're about to get deep. Welcome back, deep divers. We've covered a lot of ground in the last two parts talking about 9/11 conspiracy theories. But now I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the human element. Like, Why do these theories resonate with some people even when there's evidence to the contrary?
Yeah, it's a crucial aspect to consider because even if we debunk every claim, the underlying anxieties and uncertainties that fuel these theories, they don't just disappear.
Right. 9/11 was such a massive traumatic event. It makes sense that people would struggle to process it and try to find some kind of explanation.
Exactly. The official explanations, even if they're factually correct, can sometimes feel inadequate in the face of such immense loss and suffering. It's like we're searching for a deeper meaning, a reason that goes beyond the facts. You've hit the nail on the head. Conspiracy theories often tap into that desire for meaning. They offer a sense of order and control in a world that suddenly feels chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah, it's like the official story, even if it's true, can feel random and senseless. But if there's conspiracy, a hidden hand guiding events, then at least there's a plan, a purpose.
Right. It satisfies that human need for patterns, for cause and effect, for narratives that help us make sense of the world, especially when faced with tragedy.
And I think there's also this element of distrust. Like a lot of people just don't trust the government or the media.
Oh, absolutely. That distrust is a key ingredient in a lot of conspiracy theories.
So when the government says this is what happened, some people are automatically skeptical.
Right. They're looking for alternative explanations that fit their worldview.
And those alternative explanations often involve powerful forces working behind the scenes.
Which can be very appealing because it makes you feel like you're in the know.
Like you're part of a select group that sees the truth while everyone else is blind.
Exactly. It creates a sense of belonging and purpose, which can be especially powerful in a world that can feel increasingly isolating.
So in a way, these theories, even if they're wrong, are fulfilling a need.
They're providing a sense of meaning, community, and even a sense of superiority.
So it's not just about debunking facts. It's about understanding the deeper psychological and social factors that drive these beliefs.
Exactly. And I think that's key to having a productive conversation about these issues.
So how do we move forward in a world where misinformation and conspiracy theories are so prevalent?
Well, it's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. But I think education is a big part of it.
Like teaching people critical thinking skills and media literacy.
Exactly. Giving people the tools to evaluate information for themselves, to identify bias, to recognize logical fallacies.
So they can be more discerning consumers of information.
Right, because in the end, it's about empowering people to think for themselves.
To question what they hear, to demand evidence, and to engage in respectful dialogue.
Even when it's difficult.
Because the truth matters. It matters for how we understand the world, how we make decisions, and how we build a better future.
I couldn't agree more.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into 9/11 conspiracy theories, I hope you've learned something new, and that you'll continue to be curious, to question, and to seek the truth wherever it may lead. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.